Hi, I'm Timothy. Today, I'll be looking at the most unnecessary, avoidable deaths in the canyon. Millions visit yearly, and these people still forget the canyon's deadly nature. From a man who baby-oiled himself for a survival video, to another who binge-watched a lightning storm from his tent, ending his trip in the craziest way possible. It was June 23, 2022. At the South Rim, the distance between safe ground and open air is often smaller than people expect. A low barrier, a few feet of rock, and then hundreds of feet of empty space. Mike Len Dufresne was 28 years old from Phoenix, Arizona. He was a content creator known for posting staged survival videos despite having little real outdoor experience. His videos were designed to make ordinary situations look dangerous. Careful camera angles, dramatic editing, and exaggerated titles turned routine outdoor activities into near disasters. The more dangerous it looked, the more attention it received. The danger didn't have to be real. It just had to look real. I mean, if it looked safe, nobody clicked. By the summer of 2022, Mike was constantly looking for bigger locations and more dramatic backdrops. Few places offered more visual impact than the Grand Canyon. He arrived at the South Rim shortly after sunrise carrying a backpack filled with camera equipment. His goal was to film several clips for an upcoming video. Throughout the morning, he moved between overlooks, searching for angles that would make him appear closer to danger than he actually was. To improve the effect, he periodically applied baby oil to his arms so they would glisten in the sunlight and make him appear sweaty and exhausted on camera. By late morning, Mike had settled on a location near the rim. The shot he envisioned wasn't supposed to be genuinely dangerous. He planned to position himself near the edge while using perspective to make it appear as though he was struggling to maintain his footing above a massive drop. After setting up a tripod, he stepped beyond a safety barrier and onto a broad section of rock overlooking the canyon. From a distance, the surface appeared stable. Up close, it was covered by a thin layer of loose grit and weathered sandstone dust. Mike had crossed enough barriers without consequence that this one probably didn't seem much different. Over time, the barriers became less of a warning and more of an inconvenience. The shot required him to stand a little farther out than most visitors would, then a little farther still. Each adjustment improved the camera angle. Mike spent several minutes adjusting camera angles, checking footage, and repositioning himself. The focus of his attention was almost entirely on what appeared on the screen. This is the point where hindsight becomes a trap. Looking back, it seems obvious that standing beyond a barrier near the edge of the Grand Canyon is dangerous. Standing there at the time, it was just part of getting the shot. As he moved into position, Mike shifted his weight and reached toward a nearby rock for balance. His oil-covered hand slid across the dusty sandstone instead of gripping it. Instinctively, he tried to catch himself. One foot slipped on the loose gravel beneath him. He took a quick step to recover, but the same layer of grit shifted beneath both feet. The illusion disappeared instantly. Mike stumbled forward and reached out again, this time trying to stop the fall rather than stage one. His hand scraped across the sandstone, but nothing held. Momentum carried him toward the edge. The fall lasted only seconds. Several people nearby heard the commotion and turned toward the rim. By the time they looked up, Mike was gone from view. The tripod remained standing exactly where he had placed it, still pointed toward the spot where he had been filming moments earlier. Emergency crews responded quickly, but the canyon had already done what gravity always does. Mike was located hundreds of feet below the rim. He died from multiple blunt force injuries sustained during the fall. Investigators recovered the tripod near the edge, along with Mike's phone, which had continued recording after the incident. Investigators identified crossing the safety barrier, unstable footing near the rim, and distraction while filming as contributing factors. The death was ruled accidental. Mike's story is what happens when a decision feels too small to think twice about. Next, a man from Ohio arrived at the Bright Angel Trail carrying a watermelon and convinced he had found a better way to prepare. It was July 17, 2019. By midday, temperatures inside the Grand Canyon had climbed above 110 degrees. Heat radiated from the canyon walls and reflected off the trail beneath hikers' feet. Rangers routinely warned visitors that descending into the canyon was optional. Climbing back out was not. Carlos Beauchamp was 54 years old from Columbus, Ohio. He worked as an insurance adjuster and spent most of his time evaluating problems, estimating risks, and looking for practical solutions. Friends knew him as someone who disliked unnecessary complication. If there was an easier way to do something, Carlos usually believed he could find it. That mindset followed him into the Grand Canyon. Carlos didn't arrive completely unprepared. In the weeks before the trip, he spent time learning about the Bright Angel Trail. Nearly every source emphasized the same advice: start early, carry plenty of water, bring appropriate footwear, and respect the heat. Carlos wasn't convinced it needed to be that complicated. The Grand Canyon attracts two kinds of people: those who respect how difficult it is, and those who think everyone else is exaggerating. Carlos believed he had found a better approach. Instead of carrying multiple liters of water and separate food supplies, he packed a large watermelon. Food and water in a single package. Like, what could be more practical than that? The morning of the hike, he arrived at the trailhead carrying the watermelon in a reusable shopping bag. He wore a t-shirt, shorts, and inexpensive flip-flops. Carrying a watermelon into the canyon is unusual enough that people noticed. He started down the trail shortly before 10 o'clock. At first, his plan appeared to work. Every so often he stopped, broke off pieces of watermelon, and ate them while resting in whatever shade he could find. The fruit was cold, refreshing, and full of water. Compared to the heavy backpacks carried by other hikers, his approach probably felt clever. By early afternoon, the temperature continued climbing. Carlos's clothes were soaked with sweat. The watermelon provided water, but it couldn't replace the electrolytes his body was losing. It also weighed nearly 10 pounds and became more awkward to carry with every mile. Then, one of his flip-flops broke. The trail surface was hot enough to burn exposed skin. Carlos attempted a temporary repair using a plastic grocery bag and a length of cord from the shopping bag, but it held together poorly. Imagine carrying a 10-pound watermelon through 110-degree heat while trying to keep a broken flip-flop attached to your foot. By then, the simplicity was gone. Several hikers passed him during the next hour. Some later described him as exhausted and unsteady. His responses to simple questions became shorter and less coherent. Heat exhaustion doesn't arrive all at once. It usually progresses in stages, with fatigue, dizziness, and confusion appearing before more serious symptoms develop. By that point, a person's ability to accurately assess their condition is often already compromised. By mid-afternoon, Carlos was no longer walking in a straight line. His pace had slowed to a shuffle, and he stopped more frequently to rest. The canyon offered less shade than he expected, and each stop seemed to last a little longer than the one before. What had started as discomfort was becoming confusion. At some point, Carlos left the established trail and headed toward a rocky area that appeared to offer better shade. Whether he intended to rest for a few minutes or believed he had found a shortcut was never determined. He never returned to the trail. Search teams located him the following day, a short distance from the hiking route. He had succumbed to heat-related illness after becoming disoriented in extreme temperatures. Investigators identified severe heat exposure, inadequate hydration planning, improper footwear, and leaving the established trail as contributing factors. The death was ruled accidental. The watermelon was found abandoned nearby. And may we all learn a lesson from that story. Sometimes what you think is practical isn't really practical, especially walking in heat with a huge watermelon on hand. Interestingly, This next story is about a certain kind of person who always believes they can push a little farther, maybe push too hard till everything went wrong. It was May 3rd, 2017. The North Kaibab Trail is the only maintained trail from the North Rim into the Grand Canyon, dropping nearly 6,000 feet over 14 miles. In early May, the upper miles can still be cold and forested. A short distance down the trail, cell service disappears entirely. Billy Joe Sabatino was 38 years old from Nashville, Tennessee. He worked as an electrician and spent most days on his feet, carrying equipment and climbing ladders. He considered himself tougher than the average person, and in many ways he was. The problem was that he treated toughness as a solution to problems it couldn't solve. He had done some hiking on local Tennessee trails, but nothing particularly remote or demanding. The North Kaibab Trail was an entirely different challenge. He had applied for a backcountry permit 3 times before finally getting one. The process took months. By the time the permit was approved, he had already told his coworkers, friends, and family about the trip. He drove more than 20 hours to get there and scheduled several days off work around it. He was hiking alone. Billy Joe started down the North Kaibab on the morning of May 3rd in good spirits. The trail was quiet, with far fewer hikers than the busier South Rim routes. About 4 miles in, on a narrow section of fractured limestone, he stepped onto a loose rock and rolled his right ankle hard. He went down immediately. After pulling off his boot, he found the ankle already swelling and bruising along the outside. He wrapped it tightly with a compression bandage from his first aid kit, took 4 ibuprofen, and rested for about half an hour. Then he laced his boot back up, tested his weight on the ankle, and continued down the trail. The fact that he still made it to camp says a lot about how determined he was. The fact that he had to crawl says even more about the condition he was in. By that evening, the ankle had swollen enough that removing the boot was difficult. He noted in his journal that the skin above the boot line looked tight and shiny. He took more ibuprofen, ate dinner, and went to sleep. What Billy Joe didn't realize was that the injury was more serious than a sprain. The fibula had fractured, and pressure was beginning to build inside his lower leg. On day 2, he was limping badly from the first step. The pain had changed. It was no longer centered around the ankle, but spread through the lower leg. He wrote that it felt different from any injury he had experienced before. He kept hiking. The tragedy is that the same stubbornness and persistence that probably helped Billy succeed in a lot of areas of life were now pushing him closer to death. By midday, he was stopping every few hundred feet. By late afternoon, he could barely put weight on the leg at all. He crawled the final stretch to his campsite, dragging his injured leg behind him across the trail. That image is difficult to ignore. By that point, his body had made it abundantly clear that something was seriously wrong. He set up his tent by bracing himself against nearby rocks. His lower leg had swollen dramatically, and the skin was stretched tight and discolored. He tried his phone, but found no signal. In his final journal entry, he described the pain as the worst he had ever experienced and noted that his toes had gone numb. The numbness was a sign that circulation to the lower leg had been compromised for hours. Tissue inside the leg was beginning to die. Over the next day, the damage continued to spread, placing increasing strain on his kidneys and other organs. Billy Joe never left camp on day 3. Alone in the canyon and unable to call for help, his condition continued deteriorating throughout the day and into day 4 as the damage spread through his body. A family member reported him overdue when an expected check-in call never came. Rangers reached his campsite on day 4 and found him dead inside his sleeping bag. The compression bandage he had applied after the injury was still wrapped tightly around his leg. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was multi-organ failure resulting from untreated acute compartment syndrome caused by a fractured fibula. Time of death was estimated to have occurred sometime during day 4 after several days of progressive organ failure. The death was ruled accidental, There is a particular kind of person who will drag themselves across a trail on their hands rather than admit the trip is over. On the South Kaibab Trail, a man so convinced he had prepared correctly that he drank himself to death on plain water. It was June 22, 2018. The South Kaibab Trail drops nearly 5,000 feet from the South Rim to the Colorado River. Unlike the Bright Angel Trail, there is no water anywhere along the route and very little shade. In late June, temperatures on the exposed ridgeline can become dangerously hot by mid-morning. Andrew Ferrante was 29 years old from Portland, Oregon. He worked as a logistics coordinator and approached most things in life with meticulous preparation. Friends joked that he could turn any decision into a research project. When he decided to hike the South Kaibab Trail, he spent 6 weeks reading forum posts, watching videos, and saving articles. He even built a preparation document on his laptop. The danger wasn't a lack of information. It was the particular information he chose to trust. The message Andrew encountered over and over again was dehydration. Nearly everything he read emphasized the dangers of not drinking enough water in the desert heat. He became fixated on it. His plan was simple: carry 6 liters of water and drink constantly, whether he felt thirsty or not. He brought no electrolyte supplements and no food. Based on advice he had read online, he believed neither was necessary. Andrew started down the trail at 7:50 that morning, drinking every 10 to 15 minutes regardless of thirst. By mile 2, his urine was completely clear, which he took as a sign that he was staying ahead of dehydration. By mile 2 1/3, he recorded a voice memo describing mild nausea and a headache. He blamed the heat and drank more water. If he'd actually been dehydrated, that would have been the right response. Instead, the thing he thought was helping was making him sicker. By mile 3 1/2, Andrew had consumed nearly 3 liters and had vomited once beside the trail. A couple hiking the same route stopped to check on him. He told them he was fine. They continued on but kept him loosely in sight. Something about the situation didn't seem right. By mile 4, the nausea had become persistent. His headache was worsening, and he stopped more frequently to rest. Each time he drank more water, convinced dehydration was still the problem. By mile 5, Andrew's gait had become unsteady, and he was drifting toward the outer edge of the trail on exposed sections. He sat against a rock wall at a trail marker and drank again. When the couple reached him, he was pale. His skin was damp, and his answers to basic questions didn't make sense. He couldn't clearly state his name. By then, he had consumed nearly 5 liters of water in roughly 4 hours with no food in his system. One member of the couple stayed with Andrew, while the other moved back up the trail toward better signal. At that point, the situation had moved beyond anything another hiker could realistically fix. Over the next hour, Andrew became increasingly confused and unresponsive. Approximately 70 minutes after the hikers found him, he suffered a seizure lasting around 45 seconds. He didn't fully regain consciousness after it ended. He was breathing but unresponsive when the rescue team arrived. A call connected from around mile 4 on the return climb. A rescue team reached Andrew's location approximately 70 minutes later. He was airlifted from a clearing near the trail and pronounced dead shortly after reaching a medical facility. Nearly 8 hours had passed between Andrew's first symptoms and his death. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was cerebral edema caused by severe exercise-associated hyponatremia. Blood sodium levels were critically low at the time of hospital arrival. Investigators found no food in Andrew's pack, and 5 of his 6 water bottles were empty or nearly empty. His phone contained detailed notes about dehydration prevention, but no mention of hyponatremia or electrolyte replacement. The couple who stayed with Andrew remained with him until rescuers arrived and later provided statements that helped investigators reconstruct his final hours. The death was ruled accidental. Andrew spent weeks preparing for the wrong problem. The next man barely prepared at all. It was October 28, 2014. The Bright Angel campground sits nearly a mile and a half below the south rim on the canyon floor. In late October, the inner canyon can feel comfortably warm during the day. After sunset, that changes quickly. Temperatures often drop into the 30s overnight, and wind moving through the canyon can make it feel even colder. Jimmy Lebrecht was 34 years old from suburban Atlanta, Georgia. He sold home appliances, coached his son's little league team on weekends, and considered himself an outdoorsy person. He owned a tent, had camped at a few state parks, and spent summer nights camping in the backyard with his kids. He didn't see much difference between those experiences and what he was about to do. That misunderstanding is at the center of this story. He found the canyon campsite online and booked it on impulse. He arrived at the trailhead that afternoon and started down alone. His pack contained a cotton blanket, a change of clothes, 2 sandwiches, a water bottle, and a phone charger. There was nothing in it that would have helped him handle a near-freezing night on the canyon floor. In his experience, camping meant sleeping outside when the weather was warm. He had no real sense of what a late October night at the bottom of the Grand Canyon could be like. He reached Bright Angel Campground at around 4:30 in the afternoon while it was still pleasant outside. He spread out his blanket, ate a sandwich, and spent some time walking around camp. By evening, the temperature had dropped into the low 50s. He put on his spare clothes, but as the night wore on and temperatures fell into the 30s, he began shivering steadily. He walked laps around the campground to stay warm, then wrapped himself in the cotton blanket and sat against a rock. The blanket gradually became damp from the cool night air and offered little protection from the cold. At some point, Jimmy lay down, pulled it over himself, and curled into a ball as his body tried to conserve heat. At this point, Jimmy was probably thinking about how miserable he'd feel in the morning, not whether he'd make it to morning at all. Sometime after 11 that night, the shivering stopped. Not because he had warmed up, but because his body could no longer maintain its temperature. As hypothermia progressed, confusion and overwhelming fatigue likely set in. There was no sign he tried to leave the campsite or seek help. Everything remained exactly where he had left it. A ranger conducting a routine campsite check found him at 7:15 the following morning. Jimmy was lying on his side with the damp blanket wrapped tightly around him. He wasn't breathing. A medical team reached the campsite roughly 35 minutes later, but there was nothing they could do. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was hypothermia, caused by prolonged exposure to cold temperatures without adequate insulation. Investigators found no sleeping bag, tent, sleeping pad, or thermal clothing among his belongings. The only thing he had brought for warmth was the cotton blanket. The death was ruled accidental. The inner canyon in late October and a cotton blanket from a linen closet. That combination was always going to end one way. 8 months earlier on the Colorado River, what started as the last night of a birthday trip ended with a pool float surfacing and a man not surfacing with it. It was August 17, 2013. The Colorado River at the bottom of the Grand Canyon flows cold year-round, even in the heat of August. Along some gravel bars, the water near shore can appear slow and calm. It's a deceptive impression. Just beyond the edge, the current remains powerful and unforgiving. Daniel Paul Broussard was 27 years old from Scottsdale, Arizona. He worked for an equipment rental company and had a reputation among his friends for taking jokes a little farther than most people. Once he committed to an idea, he liked seeing it through. He was on a 4-day river trip through the Grand Canyon with 6 friends. Packed in his gear was a large plastic flamingo pool float he had brought from home. He had mentioned it before the trip, and most of his friends assumed he was kidding. On the final evening, the group camped on a wide gravel bar beside the river. After dinner, Daniel pulled out the flamingo and inflated it. A few friends laughed. Others told him not to get in the water. They had spent days watching the Colorado move through rapids and narrow canyon sections, and several pointed out that it wasn't the place for a pool float. Daniel said he was staying in the eddy, stepped into the water to test the temperature, and climbed aboard. And to be fair, from the gravel bar, the eddy looked exactly like the safest part of the river. He paddled along the inner edge of the eddy for about a minute and a half, staying close to the bank. At around the 90-second mark, the float drifted past the eddy line, the invisible boundary between the slow eddy water and the main current. The change was immediate. The flamingo accelerated sideways and downstream at the same time. Daniel tried paddling back toward the gravel bar with his hands, but the current was far stronger than it looked from shore. The float traveled roughly 40 feet before reaching a hydraulic formed behind a large submerged boulder downstream of the bend. The front of the flamingo caught the circulating water and stopped abruptly. Daniel was thrown forward into the river. For a brief moment, his friends could still see him at the surface. Then the hydraulic pulled him under. By then, the consequences had caught up to the joke. The flamingo resurfaced within seconds and drifted free. Daniel did not. His friends on the bank started panicking. One waded into the water before another pulled him back. The surface above the hydraulic showed only a faint boiling disturbance, nothing that revealed the force of the recirculating current below. They watched for several minutes, expecting him to come back up. He never did. The group had no satellite messenger or satellite phone. At river level in the inner gorge, cell service is virtually non-existent. One member of the group left the campsite and spent over an hour hiking toward higher ground before finally reaching an area where an emergency call could be connected. The gap between Daniel going under and a call connecting was approximately 90 minutes. In most places, that's an eternity. At river level in the Grand Canyon, it was simply the reality of where they were. A river rescue team was dispatched, but navigating the river by raft in complete darkness delayed their arrival significantly. Daniel's body was recovered from a gravel bar downstream the following morning. The hydraulic had released him overnight as the upstream dam reduced its nightly flow release, lowering the river level enough to weaken the recirculating current. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was drowning. Lung tissue confirmed water inhalation consistent with submersion, and no significant injuries were found beyond those associated with drowning. His blood alcohol content was measured at 0.14. Investigators identified the use of a non-rated recreational float and failure to remain within the safe eddy boundary as the primary factors in the death. Statements from the 6 friends on the river trip helped investigators reconstruct the sequence of events leading up to the drowning. The flamingo float was later recovered, deflated, and torn downstream. The death was ruled accidental. Daniel clearly underestimated the river. The next man underestimated the sky. It was July 31st, 2019. The Tonto platform sits about 3,000 feet below the south rim, a wide expanse of open terrain stretching across the middle of the canyon. In late July, thunderstorms can develop rapidly and sweep into the canyon interior. When they do, the exposed sandstone ridges scattered across the platform become some of the highest points in the landscape. Vince Brian Villanueva was 45 years old from Albuquerque, New Mexico. He worked as a finishing contractor and had spent years hiking throughout the Southwest. He kept detailed logs of his trips, recorded weather conditions, and had already hiked into the Grand Canyon twice without incident. Experience was a big part of how he saw himself. He genuinely believed it gave him a better read on situations than most people had. He preferred hiking alone and often said it was easier that way. No waiting, no compromises. He began a 3-day trip from the South Rim on July 29th, planning to spend 2 nights on the Tonto platform. On the afternoon of the second day, he passed a sheltered campsite tucked into a drainage. a flat area protected by rock and largely out of the wind. He kept walking. Farther along, he found a low sandstone ridge with an unobstructed view across the canyon and decided to camp there instead. The rest of the day passed quietly. Vince cooked dinner, updated his trail log, and went to sleep under clear skies. The following morning was clear as well. By early afternoon, clouds began building over the south rim. By 2:15, the storm was directly overhead. Thunder echoed through the canyon, making it difficult to judge how close it really was. Two hikers camped in the drainage below saw Vince on the ridge and called out for him to come down. Vince stepped out, looked at the sky, and told them he had been reading canyon weather for 20 years and that the storm was going to pass east. By 3 that afternoon, the interval between lightning and thunder had dropped to less than 3 seconds. The storm was directly overhead. Vince was inside his tent on the highest point of the ridge. He did not move. He spent his final hour waiting for a storm to leave that had already arrived. At 3:22, lightning struck the sandstone ridge just a few feet from the tent. The electrical current spread across the rock and through the tent structure. Vince was inside when it happened. The two hikers in the drainage below felt the impact through the ground beneath their feet. They reached the tent within minutes. Part of the structure had collapsed, and several of the aluminum pole sections showed signs of severe electrical damage. Vince was unresponsive and not breathing. Visible burns were present on his body, consistent with a lightning strike. One hiker began CPR while the other searched for a signal. A call finally connected roughly 35 minutes after the strike. A helicopter was dispatched, but the storm prevented it from entering the area until the weather moved east. It arrived about 80 minutes after the strike. Vince was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was cardiac arrest caused by a lightning strike. Burn injuries and internal damage were consistent with a powerful electrical discharge passing through the body. Weather data recovered from a GPS device in Vince's pack showed the storm had been building for well over an hour before the strike. His trail log was recovered as well. The final entry, written 24 minutes before the lightning hit, noted that the thunder was getting louder, but that the storm still appeared to be moving east. The death was ruled accidental. 24 minutes before the strike, Vince still believed the storm was somebody else's problem.